Hi folks, this is part 2 of me talking about this game I made, called Cracks Where the Light Gets In. Last time I explained why I placed my game in the same genre as Return of the Obra Dinn, but I also mentioned that I deviated from it. I wanted to go into more detail, because when you're inspired by something, you need some good reasons for messing with the formula. But those changes can often appear skin deep, when in fact they drastically affect the gameplay, requiring all new design decisions that weren't taken lightly and are interesting to highlight. Compared to the previous devlog, I'm going to talk in a more candid and technical way, reflecting more deeply on the genre and discussing more of my development journey by explaining two important differences. Firstly, there's the relatively subtle shift from static dioramas to cycling animations, and secondly, the cataclysmic implosion that happens when deviating from Obra Dinn's incredibly tight solution mechanics in order to focus more on the events in the story than on the fates of the characters. This will be a two-parter, so for now you get a nice, quick, easy to follow video, and the next one will be a deep dive that will hopefully leave you just as bewildered as I am. I'll be spoiling some parts of Obra Dinn in a major way, so if you haven't played it by now, there are not many better ways to spend your time. In Obra Dinn, the static dioramas are incredibly good at letting the conceit of the investigation work, totally forgiving the contrivance of the Death Watch MacGuffin. They're packed with information and accompanied by immaculate sound design that would be infeasible or ruined by trying to animate any of it. They give the player all the time they need to absorb the big picture and then hone in on tiny details. And each one is a piece of digital art, visualising things like blood splatter, bullet trails and sea spray in a way you can't see anywhere else. Cracks deviates visually from Obra Dinn in 1,000 ways, and I'll say foremost that Lucas Pope is a bona fide artist who made Obra Dinn after years of industry experience and with an indie hit under his belt. His Steam page is outrageously confident that you'll already know what you're in for by the time you visit it. I am an F-tier artist who works on genome analysis, and though I've dabbled for the better part of a decade, this is my first serious game development endeavour. And sure, the dithering shader is doing some heavy lifting, injecting a lot of style into some very simple shapes. I fell down a rabbit hole of trying to find a decent edge or toon or edgy toon dissolving ethereal light shader that could handle the art style for me, and in the end, I became fed up of all the portals and encroaching dark tendrils I was accidentally making. I'm just not artistically minded enough to know how to shortcut the artistic process. I used to think that technically, barring physical or mental debilitations, anyone could draw, or learn to code, or sing, or dance. It technically just requires enough time and effort, practice and tutelage. Since making a game, I've had a change of heart. Some people are technically incapable of learning certain skills, because their motivation for it is so low that they will never be able to do enough practice to gain any competency. I couldn't make a single one of Obra Dinn's dioramas if my life depended on it and I had all the time in the world, because I'm simply not built that way. My lack of motivation for this specific type of creativity freezes my limbs in place. So the choices I made when making my game were the result of very real and strict limitations. There are so many things I could have tried to do, like giving my characters faces, or making this dirt look nicer, that seem like worthwhile improvements yet would have prevented the game from ever being finished. Although if anyone asks, everything was a stylistic choice. I've tried to turn those limitations into positives. My biggest inspiration genuinely arose from struggling with modelling. I was working on a game with lots of 2D buildings, and I wasn't happy with how the architecture was turning out. So I set myself the task of making a one-room game in order to practice. Because I couldn't and still can't model very well, my game takes place almost entirely within one room and has few superfluous objects, which fits the genre where every little detail is relevant and objects gain more and more meaning over time. The lack of faces and vocal intonation limits the character's expressiveness, but on the other hand it forces you to focus on and interpret movement, which supports the feeling of watching from a distance as an outsider. And the big one, giving my characters lengthy, realistic animations that interact with their world, was a very innocent choice on my part that easily ate a year of my life on its own, but it was easier for me to do that than making even one elaborate frozen flashback. My inspiration for animating actually came from one specific example of Obra Dinn's motionless moments. I'm pretty good at puzzle games, and my spatial awareness is a strong suit, and so I breezed through parts that I've seen people get hung up on. But one scene had me stumped for a while, and it's here looking through these tiny gaps after hearing a gunshot.
Someone shoot the damn thing!
I thought this perspective was brilliant and compelling in a game with otherwise standard first-person movement, but for some reason I just couldn't connect the cause and effect in my head, and I only sussed it through trial and error. There isn't much mystery. Someone in the distance has misfired and killed our friend here, but it's hard to tell that he's been shot when someone just down the corridor was impaled under similar circumstances, and having led a sheltered life, I'm not familiar with the difference between the respective wounds. Adding animation felt like a way to make this compelling perspective work across an entire game, and as soon as I implemented it, I realised that my core gameplay was just those parts in stealth games where you're looking through a keyhole, which I also thought was pretty fun. At first, I made the gaps too small, and you couldn't move around, so it was hard to get every angle that you'd expect. But I've tweaked it over many iterations until you're able to see everything you need to, so it doesn't feel like your observation is unfairly hindered. Since the player doesn't have first-person movement, it allows the animations of the people in the room to grab all of your focus, and so there's even more lovely reinforcement of design that allows the animated actions to be quite complicated yet still readable, and show different details when looking through different gaps. I know that animation in games is so ubiquitous it's barely worth commenting on, and my animations are certainly not as neat and seamless as I'd like, but it took a lot of consideration not to rely heavily on gestures that would be easily misinterpreted while having them substantially impact the gameplay. By making sure that all of my artistic and technical limitations feed into the design, as well as offering something new, I've hopefully made something that has a distinctive artistic merit and all of the pieces feel like they belong together. I'd certainly argue that it's not just Obra Dinn, but the people move and don't die. Although honestly, I'd welcome that review in a heartbeat. And that's all for now. Please wishlist the game, if only for the sake of the algorithm, and join me next time if you're excited to hear about ambiguity and abductive reasoning.